Well, I am honored to be speaking at an event honoring International Women's Day, especially talking about one of the most groundbreaking, inspirational, and successful women of all time, at least in terms of the public consciousness, and that's Dolly Parton. And I'm doing my PhD research on the diverse representation of Southern women in the works of Dolly Parton. And the title of Girl of Many Colors, of course, is a play on her song Coat of Many Colors. So I see Dolly Parton as a patchwork of different identities, strengths, and talents. So my particular research looks how Dolly Parton in her songs and her film roles and in her fiction gives a voice to often voiceless women. I'm from the American South, and there's stereotypes still that pervade American media and our own biases of Southern women, either oversexed, nymphet, backwoods Barbies, or uneducated women, or Gone with the Wind, Scarlett O'Hara, spoiled heiresses. But I think one of the greatest things about Dolly Parton being the songwriter is that she sort of breaks down those stereotypes, and you can look to her lyrics to see the real lives of Southern women. So the research questions that I have in my particular PhD research are, in what diverse ways does Dolly Parton represent Southern men in her works? I'm a big believer that music lyrics are a form of storytelling. Dolly Parton doesn't call herself a songwriter, she calls herself a song teller. She says that her songs are just stories set to music. And if you separate sometimes music from lyrics and look at the lyrics, you can see the stories of real people's lives. And Dolly Parton has always said that her songs are autobiographical. They're either about her or somebody that she's known. Or if they're not autobiographical, she imagines the lives of people who could be living in those circumstances. The second question is, in what ways is Dolly Parton, the figure of Dolly Parton, uniquely different? Different to country music, different to other singer-songwriters, different to other public figures? To what extent is Dolly Parton feminist in the sense of informally or formally aligned to feminist movements or thoughts? And how can we understand Dolly Parton as exemplifying female empowerment in ways that aren't formally feminist? And that last question I always get asked, is Dolly Parton a feminist? I go, no and yes. And there's such a complex way to answer that question, but I'm sure I'll get that question. So, my research on Dolly Parton examines in detail carefully selected representative examples drawn from her entire music catalog and filmography. Dolly Parton has written over 5,000 songs, so it was a chore to only pick a few that I think were the strongest examples of the categories that I've selected. It will analyze how Southern women are represented in her works. While the Southern women in Dolly's works are diverse, her female characters frequently fall into one of several key categories. Therefore, I have split her female characters in distinct categories, including women in poverty, prostitutes and fallen women, women as victim, and empowered women. The representative examples selected for discussion from each of these categories will then be subject to a deep analysis and will be selected only after consideration of every song published by Dolly Parton and every fictional role Dolly has played. The recent achievements, I was recently included in the Bloomsbury Press book Diva, from Fierceness and Feminism from Pop to Hip Hop. And that looks at Dolly Parton, Mariah Carey, Beyonce, and Grace Jones, and other female singer-songwriters, and how they represent their own distinct form of feminism. Because feminism is diverse in its approach, in the way it's lived, and the way it's expressed. And I spoke in Macon, Georgia recently, talking about how Dolly Parton's image evolution is actually a reflection of the image and metamorphosis that she has from within. So the very first category that I'm looking at is called In the Good Old Days When Times Were Bad. And that's a contradictory, complex way to look at childhood poverty. That, of course, is Dolly Parton's first picture. And as many people who know about her life story, she grew up in extreme isolation and extreme poverty. She was the fourth of 12 children, and where she was growing up in rural Tennessee, there was really no distinction between men and women, boys and girls, because women were expected to work just as hard, if not harder than men, in order to survive. And so this particular category looks at women in poverty, what they do to survive, how they survive it, and their strength. So some of the few examples in this particular category are Dolly Parton's songs, In the Good Old Days When Times Were Bad, Coat of Many Colors, Me and Little Andy, Mama's, Daddy's Moonshine Still, etc. And so Dolly Parton approaches her childhood poverty in very complex ways. And so I say that we as human beings, of course, may have a contradictory, complex way in which we view our childhoods. We can have nostalgia for our childhoods and we can think about the positives of it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we forget the negatives. And so Dolly Parton approaches women impoverished in a complex, sometimes contradictory way. But I think that just represents that she has a complex way in which she views her own childhood poverty, but the way that she views poverty still. And this particular chapter is really important because Dolly Parton in those songs gives a voice to women who still suffer in isolation and rural poverty. The area from which Dolly Parton is from, Appalachia, is the most impoverished area in the States. It has limited infrastructure, limited funds, limited attention. It's often forgotten in the American consciousness. There's been a few books like Hillbilly Elegy that came out, and a few sociological studies and sociological works that examine, but the area from which Dolly Parton is from is still extremely impoverished and extremely forgotten. And she's done a lot to give back to that community, of course, through Dollywood and the Imagination Library, which has come over to England and Europe, which gives children from the ages of 1 to 5 a free book every month. So she tries her hardest to give back to that. And she does it, in my opinion, the greatest way by writing songs about those women's lives in poverty. The second particular chapter is called Straight Talking Working Girls, and that is a play on her movie Straight Talk and her song Working Girl. And that chapter is about how Dolly Parton represents women in the workforce. Women in the workforce in her songs and in her movies, they have so many obstacles to overcome that their male counterparts don't. Sexual harassment, low pay, gender equality, the way that they're treated because they might be from rural southern places. When they go to the big city, they're treated differently because of their socioeconomic backgrounds and their gender. And Dolly Parton in her songs and her works gives a voice to women who struggle to make ends meet and struggle to work up the ladder. My favorite chapter, which is the most shocking after analyzing, Dolly Parton has written extensively on fallen women and sex workers. And there's a twofold reason that Dolly Parton has done that. The first, she says the reason that she has done that is because the area in which she was from, rural Tennessee, women had two options to leave. They could either get married and have a baby or become a prostitute. And Dolly Parton's songs are actually, her early songs are actually inspired by a woman that she met in town, at the town called the Painted Lady. And Dolly Parton was inspired by that woman in order to construct her outer image. And Dolly Parton approaches those women from a sympathetic viewpoint. She approaches those women from a religious standpoint, the judge not, yes ye be judged, but also she tries to give a voice to women who are forced into sex work or choose sex work as an option due to their socioeconomic backgrounds. So in Dolly Parton's songs about painted ladies and fallen women, The women are always choosing that particular employment due to their backgrounds. They view it as a way to get out of their rural isolation. And that particular image is from Dolly's musical, The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. And although that's a cheeky title, the movie is actually quite deep in terms of accepting of these women. These sex workers are given a backstory of why they chose sex work, and they find community together in order to survive in this brothel. And the last chapter is called An Eagle When She Flies, and this is about female victimhood and female empowerment. And Dolly Parton when we think of Dolly Parton, we think of her as being very vivacious and gregarious and positive, but she has, especially in her early career, wrote a lot of songs about females, Southern females, and victimhood in terms of lack of abortion access, women being left unmarried, and female suicide, female mental health struggles. But because of Dolly Parton's outer positive image, she was able to get away with that on country music, because people were like, oh, it's Dolly Parton singing. But they didn't really separate the music from the lyrics and realize that Dolly Parton was giving a voice to women that she knew that were in victimhood. And to turn it and to end it on a positive note, Dolly Parton also writes about female Southerners that are empowered through their own merits and through their own hard work and through their own determination. They get out of poverty, they get out of victimhood, they overcome all the socioeconomic barriers and the barriers of their gender to rise out of the South and rise out of their environments in order to make it and be empowered. And Dolly Parton not only does that in her songs, she does it in the way that she treats people, in the way that she writes, and all the philanthropy that she does, and all the millions of dollars that she gives to charity. She always says that she felt like if she didn't give back to women, and if she didn't give back to people, that she would be wasting the talent that God gave her. So I think she's a great figure to be speaking about today on International Women's Day, because I know from the region that I'm from a similar region in the South, she has given so much back to the people, not only through her music, but through donations and through charity. And I think we should celebrate people and women who try to lift other women up.